Life Stories brings you tales of resilience, love, and the strength of the human spirit. In today's story, we explore the life of Claire, a devoted mother whose peaceful family life in the suburbs of San Diego takes a shocking turn. What begins as a routine weekend unravels into a tale of betrayal, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. Join us as we dive into this gripping journey of survival and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's story, and stay tuned for more heartfelt narratives that inspire and move us all. The gentle warmth of the early summer sun poured over the quiet neighborhood in the San Diego suburbs, casting long, golden shadows over tree-lined streets. From the kitchen window of my small white house on Maplewood Avenue, I could see the first stirrings of life: a jogger passing by, a neighbor watering their flower beds, the hum of a distant lawn mower. Inside, however, the hum of activity was much more personal. "Mom, is Dad coming to my game today?" Lucas asked, his small fingers fumbling with the buttons on his baseball uniform. His voice carried a mix of hope and caution, as though he already suspected the answer but couldn't help himself from asking. Lucas had always been a curious child, one with an unshakable sense of optimism that often left me marveling at his resilience. But today, his question made my hands pause mid-motion, a slice of bread dangling over the lunchbox I was packing. I hesitated before responding, my chest tightening. "Well," I began, my voice lighter than I felt. "You know how busy your dad has been lately. He's got a lot of work to do. But maybe next time?" Lucas nodded, his face falling just slightly, though he tried to mask it with a determined smile. "That's okay," he said, his tone suggesting he was trying to convince himself more than me. He didn't argue. He rarely did these days. And I wished he would. 8 years old. And already he was learning to carry disappointment without complaint, to adapt to gaps that shouldn't have been there. As he picked up his bat and glove, I saw the same kind determination that had kept him practicing his swing for hours last weekend despite the absence of his father, who had promised to join us but never showed. Lucas had always been a remarkably thoughtful child. His teachers often praised his maturity and focus, especially in math, where he excelled far beyond his classmates. He wasn't just gifted, he was kind, always quick to share his toys or encourage a teammate. Watching him, I sometimes wondered how he'd turned out so balanced when life had thrown him its own share of disappointments. Our mornings always began this way. By 7 o'clock, the kitchen would be alive with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, the rustle of cereal boxes, and the hum of mundane conversations. By 8 o'clock, Lucas would be off to school, and I'd head to my flower shop, Petals and Blooms, where the hours passed like a colorful blur of fragrant blossoms, delicate arrangements, and the quiet satisfaction of creating beauty. It was in that shop, almost a decade ago, where I'd first met Ethan. He had walked in wearing a perfectly pressed suit, the picture of composure, to order flowers for his twin brother Ryan's new clinic opening. He'd asked for white roses, his brother's favorite, and the way he smiled at them, gentle, almost reverent, had stayed with me long after he'd left. 3 months later, we were engaged. Those early years were magical in a way that felt almost too good to be true. Ethan was a young, ambitious accountant at a prestigious firm, and his drive matched my own dreams of running a flower shop. Our bond grew deeper with each shared goal, each quiet Sunday spent cooking together, and eventually, with the birth of Lucas, who completed our picture-perfect life. Ethan's mother, Margaret, adored us. She'd been our rock, a woman with a warm smile and a heart big enough to keep our family firmly connected. It was Margaret who insisted on weekly family dinners, gatherings where Ethan's twin brother Ryan joined us, filling the house with laughter and shared stories. Ryan, a physician at a busy clinic, had always been the emotional one, vibrant, warm, and endlessly compassionate. Ethan, by contrast, was meticulous, measured, and sometimes distant. But I'd come to see that as his way of providing stability. He was the planner, the steady rock in a family of open hearts. And yet, things began to shift 6 months ago when Margaret passed away. Her death left a void that none of us could fill. For Ethan and Ryan, it seemed to create an invisible wall. They grew apart, their once close bond strained by disputes over Margaret's inheritance and the logistics of settling her affairs. Ethan threw himself into work. He started coming home later, often distracted even when he was present. At first, I assumed it was his way of coping, but as the months passed, his absences became harder to explain. Weekends that had once been filled with family outings or afternoons at Lucas's baseball games were now marked by his empty chair in the stands. Lucas, too perceptive for his age, seemed to adjust. He rarely asked questions, though I could see the flicker of disappointment in his eyes when his father wasn't there. Watching him bear that burden quietly made my heart ache in ways I struggled to describe. That morning, as I pulled up the shutters of Petals and Blooms, I found my thoughts drifting back to those early days with Ethan. I could still picture the way he'd watched me work, fascinated by the way I paired flowers not just for their beauty but for their meanings. "Your bouquets are like magic," he'd said once, his tone full of admiration. When had those words stopped coming? The shop had been my dream for as long as I could remember. A sanctuary where I could channel my love for creating beauty into something that brought joy to others. Yet even here, surrounded by the vibrant hues of tulips and peonies, I couldn't shake the growing unease that followed me like a shadow. Margaret's absence lingered everywhere. Without her grounding presence, the bonds that once felt unbreakable were fraying. Ryan still joined us for Lucas's games, a steady source of warmth and encouragement. But Ethan's distance felt like a quiet unraveling, pulling us further apart with each passing day. That night, after tucking Lucas into bed, I sat alone in the living room, the soft glow of the chandelier casting a golden light over the room. Ethan had texted earlier to say he'd be home late again, though he didn't specify why. I stared at my wedding ring, the cool metal catching the light in a way that seemed almost mocking. This wasn't the life we'd promised each other. The family we'd built felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to stop it. Looking out the window at the stillness of Maplewood Avenue, I let out a deep sigh. Our story, once so full of promise, was shifting into something I barely recognized. Little did I know, those quiet doubts were only the beginning of a storm far greater than I could have imagined. The weekend arrived with its usual rhythm, though the air felt different, heavy, expectant. It was a Saturday. A day that should have been filled with the joy of cheering Lucas on at his baseball game. Instead, the morning began with Ethan's announcement, delivered in his usual calm, measured tone. "Sorry, I have to cancel all plans today. I need to review some important documents." Lucas, already dressed in his baseball uniform and holding his glove, hesitated before answering. "Okay, Dad," he said, his voice small but steady. The sight of him trying to mask his disappointment pierced me. 4 months. I had watched as Lucas adapted to the growing absences of his father, his resilience shining through in ways that both amazed and saddened me. This morning, though, the usual excuses felt heavier, tinged with something I couldn't quite name. Ethan retreated to his study almost immediately, closing the door behind him with a deliberate click. From where I stood in the kitchen, I could hear the faint hum of his voice as he spoke on the phone, the words too muffled to make out. Occasionally, the sound of papers rustling or the tapping of keys broke the silence. He didn't come out for lunch, only responding through the door. "I'll eat later." His behavior, though meticulous as always, felt off, different in a way I couldn't explain. He seemed nervous. Not the kind of nervous I'd seen when he prepared for a major presentation or handled a difficult client, but something deeper, more guarded. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I took Lucas to his game, where Ryan was already waiting in the stands. His presence had become a constant in our lives. A quiet reassurance in the midst of growing uncertainty. Lucas's face lit up when he saw his uncle. And for a moment, the weight of Ethan's absence lifted. As we drove home later that evening, Lucas chattered excitedly about his game, his voice full of energy. Yet beneath his cheerful words, I could sense the unspoken question lingering in his mind: would his father have been proud of him today? When we arrived home, a strange warmth greeted us. The living room chandelier cast a soft, welcoming light, and the table was set with a care I hadn't seen in years. A new, expensive-looking tablecloth adorned the surface, and the scent of something rich and savory wafted from the kitchen. "Is Dad cooking?" Lucas asked, his eyes wide with surprise. It was a reasonable question. In our 10 years of marriage, Ethan had ventured into the kitchen only a handful of times, usually to reheat leftovers. The sight of him standing at the stove, a recipe book propped open beside him, was as foreign as it was unsettling. "Good evening." Ethan greeted us with a smile that felt too polished, too practiced. "I wanted to do something special tonight. I know I've been busy lately, and I thought this would be a nice way to make it up to you both." Lucas beamed, his earlier disappointment forgotten. "Wow, Dad, it smells amazing." Ethan's gaze lingered on me as he said, "I hope it's enough to make up for everything." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was a gesture of love, of redemption. But something in the way he moved, the too careful precision of his chopping, the way his eyes darted to the clock every few minutes, sent a chill down my spine. The meal was served promptly at 7 o'clock. New England clam chowder, freshly baked focaccia, and a crisp salad adorned the table like something out of a magazine. Ethan's movements were smooth, practiced, but there was tension in his shoulders, a subtle strain in his voice. Lucas dove into the food with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old. While I hesitated, studying Ethan, his smile was warm, his words were kind, but there was something behind his eyes, a shadow I couldn't ignore. "Do you like it?" he asked, his gaze fixed on me. "It's delicious," I replied, though the words felt hollow. The meal continued, each bite bringing a growing sense of unease. I noticed how Ethan's left hand never strayed far from his phone, how his eyes flickered to the screen with every notification. And then it happened. "Mom, I feel sick," Lucas said suddenly, his voice trembling. My heart stopped. I turned to him, seeing the pallor in his face, the fear in his eyes. Before I could react, a wave of dizziness hit me, and the room began to spin. My limbs felt heavy, unresponsive, and a cold realization washed over me. Ethan didn't move. He sat there, calm, composed, watching us with an expression that sent a chill through my core. As I collapsed to the floor, I heard him speak, his voice detached, almost clinical. "Yes, it's done. They'll both be gone soon," he said into his phone, as though reporting the success of a business transaction. In that moment, my instincts kicked in. I closed my eyes, pretending to lose consciousness completely, and whispered to Lucas, "Stay still. Don't move." His small hand tightened around mine, a silent acknowledgement that he understood. From the floor, I could hear the sound of Ethan's footsteps retreating to his study, the faint hum of a shredder starting up. My mind raced, grasping at fragments of information, trying to piece together what was happening. The man I had loved for a decade, the father of my child, had just tried to kill us. And yet, as the seconds stretched into minutes, I knew this wasn't the end. Ethan had underestimated one thing, my resolve. Whatever his plan was, he wouldn't succeed. I opened my eyes just slightly, enough to see Lucas lying beside me, his small body trembling. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We'll get through this." Outside, the quiet hum of Maplewood Avenue carried on, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding within our home. But inside, beneath the flickering light of the chandelier. A battle for survival had just begun. Time moved painfully slowly. Lying on the cold floor, my ears strained to catch every sound from Ethan's study. The shredder's rhythmic whirring sent chills through me as it devoured the evidence of his crimes. Each pass of the blades carving deeper into my resolve. My mind raced, replaying every moment of the evening. Each action and word that had led to this unthinkable betrayal. Lucas's small hand tightened in mine, his tiny body trembling against me. My heart ached for him, for the innocence shattered in the most unimaginable way. As much as I wanted to hold him, comfort him, I knew we had to stay still, to feign unconsciousness until the right moment. His courage humbled me. At just 8 years old, he was showing a level of composure I barely felt myself. "Mom," he whispered faintly, his voice barely audible. "Don't move," I whispered back, my lips barely forming the words. "Stay still." Through slitted eyes, I watched Ethan emerge from his study, a phone pressed to his ear. He stopped in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the warm light from the chandelier. His voice, cold and detached, cut through the quiet air. "Yes. Everything's on schedule," he said. "The effect is certain. They won't make it." The weight of his words felt like a physical blow. How had it come to this? The man I had loved, who had once held my hand in the delivery room and marveled at our newborn son, was now speaking about our deaths as though they were a routine part of his day. I tightened my grip on Lucas's hand, grounding myself in the here and now. My son was alive. I was alive. And as long as that remained true, there was hope. Ethan lingered for a moment longer, his gaze sweeping over us. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't come closer. When he finally turned and retreated to his study, I exhaled silently, my chest aching from the effort of staying calm. The clock on the wall ticked with cruel precision, each second stretching into an eternity. I tried to think, to plan, but my thoughts kept circling back to the unimaginable truth: Ethan had poisoned us. And yet, he hadn't stayed to ensure we were truly unconscious. That was his mistake. One I clung to as a lifeline. My phone, still on the dining table, held the recordings of everything that had transpired. If I could get to it, if I could alert someone, there was a chance we could escape this nightmare. "Lucas," I whispered, "when I tell you, stay completely still and keep your eyes closed. Can you do that?" "Yes, Mom," he replied, his voice trembling but resolute. Summoning every ounce of strength, I waited for the sound of the shredder to resume. As soon as it did, I carefully opened my eyes and shifted my body, inch by inch, toward the table. The distance felt insurmountable, but I refused to give up. My fingers finally brushed the edge of the table. Stretching further, I managed to pull the phone toward me, my movements painstakingly slow to avoid making any noise. The screen lit up faintly as I unlocked it, revealing the recording app still running in the background. Relief flooded through me. I sent a quick message to Ryan: "Help. Urgent. Come now." The moment the message sent, I slid the phone back into its place, my heart pounding. Now, all I could do was wait. Minutes felt like hours as I lay there, listening to the sounds of Ethan's movements in the study. The shredding stopped, replaced by the faint clinking of a suitcase being packed. My stomach turned as I imagined the life he was preparing for, the new beginning he had planned with the inheritance he'd tried to kill us for. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, cutting through the oppressive silence. My heart leapt. Ethan froze. I heard his footsteps approach the entrance, his voice carrying a hint of irritation. Who could it be at this hour? "Ethan," Ryan's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Why haven't you been answering your phone?" The door creaked open, and I could just make out Ethan's response. "Ryan, what are you doing here?" "I was worried," Ryan said, his tone steady but laced with urgency. "And I'm not alone." I opened my eyes just enough to see the scene unfolding. Behind Ryan stood 3 police officers, their expressions grim. "What is this?" Ethan demanded, his composure beginning to crack. "It's over, Ethan," Ryan said. "I know what you've done." With those words, I summoned the strength to sit up, pulling Lucas with me. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw us, alive and alert. The blood drained from his face, and for the first time, I saw something resembling fear in his expression. Ryan stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Everything is recorded," he said, holding up his phone. "The calls, the shredding, all of it. You can't deny it." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The weight of his actions, the undeniable evidence, had stripped him of his carefully constructed facade. As the police officers moved to arrest him, Lucas clung to me, his small body trembling with relief. I held him close, tears streaming down my face. We were safe. Ryan's voice softened as he turned to us. "It's going to be okay," he said. "You're safe now." In that moment, I felt the fragile thread of hope strengthen into something unbreakable. We had survived the unthinkable, and though the road ahead would be long and uncertain, we would face it together. As the summer sun set over the quiet neighborhood of San Diego, a sense of peace finally returned to our lives. The nightmare of that evening had left its mark, but it also brought clarity. Lucas and I moved forward, supported by the unwavering kindness of Ryan and the community that rallied around us. The white roses in my flower shop no longer reminded me of pain but stood as symbols of hope and renewal. Lucas, with his bright smile and unyielding spirit, became a testament to resilience. Together, we rebuilt our lives, learning that love and strength often emerge in the darkest of moments. Sometimes, family isn't just about blood, it's about those who stand by you, unconditionally, when everything else falls apart. Our story taught us that even when life shatters, the pieces can be mended into something stronger and more beautiful. Thank you for joining us in this journey. If you'd like to hear more stories of hope, love, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for new videos. Each story is a reminder that no matter how tough life gets, there's always a way forward. See you in the next one.